Good evening. I gotta stop. Gotta stop. Just for some reason, whatever it may be, maybe it's current events and all the crazy stuff that's happening in the world these days. And but for whatever reason it happens to be, I've got "Burning Down the House" by Talking Heads stuck in my own head. So make of that what you will. But anyway, it's a good song. It's a good song. Should be listened to from time to time as just a general course of treatment. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we got 10 releases. I am not going to lie. I spent more time this week listening to music. I typically listen to about half of an album, or half of a release, I should say, before I make the decision. Sometimes even like one track more than half, but it's one of those. My general rule is if I've listened to at least half of the release and it just has not grabbed my attention or has actively irritated the piss out of me, then like that's it. There's no saving the back half, right? Because realistically, musical releases tend to be a little bit more front-loaded. That's just the nature of it. So, and yeah, as it was, I spent many hours this week. I mean, granted, my playlists have gotten significantly smaller, both for June and July. But as it is, as of this time yesterday, I think I had 4 releases, like, solidly. I had a few that I was on the fence about, and then I kind of came back around to them. But, yeah, anyway, it was kind of a rough week in terms of putting stuff together. But I did what I always do in these situations, and I went digging through the EPs. And EPs, if they're not absolute garbage, tends to be a pretty reliable situation, just because nice, short, straight to the point. And for that reason, out of the 10 releases I'm going to be talking about today, half of them are EPs. Another 3 of them are what I consider to be mini records. So only 2 of them are full-length LPs. But last week was kind of heavy on the LPs, so I think that balances out. As it stands, with the exception of rap and hip-hop, I think we're pretty well represented here. We have a metal release. We have an electronic release. We have quite a bit of indie. We've got a pretty solid pop release. And then we have a bunch of just sort of... There's some stuff that might be hip-hop adjacent. There's also some stuff that is a little bit more eclectic in the musical world. So it has ended up being a little bit more diverse than some weeks, but let's just quit beating around the bush and get into it. Okay. All right. So we're going to start out with a very, very short EP here. 9 minutes long, but that's okay. Sometimes you don't really need a lot of a long play time. So this is the EP Dear from the artist TOSHCHIII. And honestly, this is something that I'm going to be just completely honest. It's not super memorable. It's one of those, it's 9 minutes long. Let's be real. That's probably to be expected. But it's light and it's easy and it's fun. And it's the type of thing that when I saw the album artwork, I was like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. It's got deer fur on it. So, why not? And it's kind of pop rap. So this is what I was saying. Like, there's maybe a hip hop adjacent type thing. It's kind of like that sort of, it's kind of rap, but it's also basically pop music. But musically, it uses the EDM of like 10 to 15 years ago with a more modern take in the form of that sort of crunchy archive core sound from time to time. I don't know. It's just like, it's kind of a fun little release. Get kind of hype around it. It feels of 2026, but also you can definitely hear the older influence on this. So it's the type of, like, this is one of those, again, proof of concept albums, and this is an artist who has put out one other EP in a full length before, so it'd be nice to get another full length, I guess, if it's, you know. Like, again, 10 to 15 years ago, this would have just sounded very, very similar to a lot of stuff that was being released at that point in time. This was, in a lot of ways, the dominant sound in, like, sort of the pop music sphere. But those days have passed, so you can come back around to that sound and utilize it. Here's the that little kind of rap adjacent section. Like, it's a little crunchier. The levels feel like they've just been pushed up a little bit higher than they reasonably should be, which is I don't know, like a telltale sign of the era it has been produced in. But there's something to it. Again, I don't know if it's just like a weird nostalgia for the past decade, which, 2016, there probably is some nostalgia for it, but so yeah, you get the idea. Very short, very simple, very to the point with that kind of sound that, again, to me just recalls the general, like, that electro pop, or what pop music was about 10 to 15 years ago. But I don't know. Again, it was refreshing. I don't hear that very often, which is fair because, again, it was the dominant sound a decade or so ago. So it would make sense that it's not super popular right now. But that is the EP Dear by the artist TOSHCHIII. Really short. You can easily spin it a few times, kind of get yourself hyped up a little bit, or kind of moving around. None of the tracks stick around for too long. Honestly, I will say the Deer on the Road Ender is a bit of a change of pace. It slows things down a little bit. It feels a little bit more introspective. It's nice. It's overall, it's quite, 6 tracks and 9.5 minutes. It's quite well put together. So we're going to probably move quickly today, so I'm just going to throw that out there as well, too. Up next, we have the EP Тебе, or About You, from the group ГАФТ. And honestly, this is a group with a fairly extensive back catalog, and I actually did see, they released an album last year, but it was an acoustic version of their album from 2024, and when there are groups that release acoustic versions of albums, I typically don't really talk about it. So anyway, this is supposedly a new sound for them, and since I have no previous I've had no previous encounter with their music, I'm not going to be able to gauge how new the sound is, but every description of it said self-ironic dolphin. Dolphin is a Russian musician who is actually quite good, worth checking out, I would say. But self-ironic dolphin, Midwest emo guitar, and hip-hop vocals with bright pop choruses from the 2000s. I saw that, and I think that's the formulation of the sound that the group themselves, or that's how they themselves described it. I don't think I would agree with that at all. Like, those elements are all there, but I don't think that's, first of all, just as a word salad, it doesn't really mean anything. And while those elements are all there to some degree, I don't really feel it's that. There is something musically happening here. To me, it feels like this back and forth between a darker alt rock sound and that more spoken word hip hop like Zoloty Zuby, that Russian group that I've talked about a few times in the last half year. I think like 3 times in the last half year. So like a distant cousin to Zoloty Zuby in terms of the vocal delivery. But let me just go ahead and make it. So this is that alt rock sound that I was talking about. Oh, yeah. That kind of like self-ironic spoken word, Zolty Zuby, distant cousin type sound is really on the opening track. But I still think that alt rock sound is still very clearly like the main component here, which, you know, it's an odd release, I will say. Like the first time I listened to it, it happens typically a few times a week, but there are usually some releases where the first time I listen to it, it doesn't quite click, but I also realize that I just need to give it a second to settle. And that's how it was with this one, where the first time I listened through it, it's just like, yeah, there definitely is something there, but like, I don't know. It was a hard one like to get through, but then I came back around to it the second time and was like, okay, yeah, I get it. Again, this is supposedly kind of a new take on their sound. So I don't know, maybe like for people who are well familiar with this group, this is kind of a new and exciting thing. Just kind of jumping into it without any preconceptions of what this is going to be. It's fine. Like, there's definitely something to it. And on an EP, like, it might pique your interest a little bit, but it doesn't overstay its welcome, which is always the case with EPs. So, and Masha Hima is kind of a up-and-coming name, so the fact that she's on it, I think, had maybe piqued some people's attention as well. But anyway, that is the EP тебе from the group ГАФТ, or ГАФТ. Now, moving on, this is probably the most energetic that we're going to have. This is the album, let's be real, it's not albums. Like, this is an EP. I know it's 7 songs, but it's less than 20 minutes long. And one of the songs is a remix of the song that comes right before it, which is bold to be sure, but regardless. This is azzaruki, or azzaruki, I don't know exactly, but azzaruki, and the album is Meeting of the Elected, or the EP. This is glitchcore, which kind of hyperpop energy, some hip hop elements, and then the overall vibe of a computer having a seizure. It's actually really fun. I don't know. Glitchcore, it's one of those genres I don't see very often, and it's probably fair because I feel like having a lot of this or large doses would be too much. But every once in a while, getting like a 20-minute dose of this is pretty all right. And Azzaruki actually put out a release last month, which I didn't get around to. But then in June, he dropped this one, and kind of like with the Deer EP, the levity of this just clicked. So I mean, it glitchcore, so I also was trying to figure out like what the hell is going on with the album artwork. We've got a maid, but it's not maid core. She's holding it like a stake, some sort of ethereal being summoned from another dimension or something. I don't know. There's a lot to unpack here. A lot of energy. See, again, this is the type of thing that I feel like would get kind of annoying to listen to for extended periods of time. I mean, I again, anytime this type of music comes up, not specifically glitchcore, but that music that's like really fast and fun and energetic, but then would be hella annoying in the long term. I always think of mindless self-indulgence, even though from a sound point of view, it's quite a bit different from this. Yeah, it's still kind of got that. And so we got the distortion, we got the kind of the hip hop beats and vocal delivery. Not all the time, but quite regularly. But it is kind of also just a lot of like that really hyperactive, hyper pop electronic music. So So again, while this is again something just like spazzing out, which is kind of fun. I don't know. Again, I wouldn't listen to this all the time, but when I did sort of just click into this one, while digging through the playlist, it was kind of like, all right, yeah, this is very specific sound. Glitchcore is technically what I think the label would be, but it's good. It works. So that is the EP Meeting of the Elected from the artist Azzaruki, with probably the weirdest album artwork this week, but okay. Moving on, we come to the fourth EP, Mечта, from, I think it's Istoma, but this is one of those I didn't even bother to check. Istoma, sorry. Istoma is the feeling of pleasant relaxedness just the sweetest weakness and the complete, just like completely, it's complete relaxation. I did not know that before. Istoma is the name of the artist. From a sound point of view, this is the sort of pretentious, overly verbose text that I have in my notes. The sound of Fleet Foxes and early Bon Iver, and Cat Power Laura Marling. The type of music that is dreamy, wistful, full of whimsy and wonder and longing. The type of music that makes you want to bask in a ray of sunshine and also stare dejectedly out a rain-streaked window while nursing a broken heart. The type of music where moving away to a remote cabin in the wilderness feels ideal, regardless of what your current emotional state might be. So, yeah. Hopefully you'll understand. The musical references, again, Fleet Foxes, Bon Iver, Laura Marling, Cat Power. Radiohead. Шу, знаете, я особо никогда не думал даже, что это значит по-английски. Мне просто всегда показалось что-то, может быть, portmanteau или составное слово. Radiohead. Я, наверное, перевел просто вот тупо, ну как, не дословно, но как радиопереломная голова. Ну, как-то так, я не знаю. Вот, мне очень нравится музыка Radiohead, но я не такой фанат, чтобы сказать, что я сильно погрузился в том, чтобы разобраться, почему именно они выбрали название Radiohead. So, how I would translate Radiohead? Наверное, просто тупо и дословно. Но, может быть, есть какая-то там история. А если есть, тогда как-то надо подумать об этом. Но мне кажется, очень часто с названиями групп проще дословно. Это не то, что как название фильма, когда есть, может быть, какой-то смысл. А мне кажется, это просто очень часто, когда они выбирают название, ну, группы, это просто потому, что звучит прикольно. So. Actually, let me check. Is there... I did Radiohead. Chose Radiohead because the concept of a Radiohead receiving information and the Talking Heads track Radiohead. I was just talking about Talking Heads a second ago. Radiohead, all these things about receiving stuff. It's about the way you take information in, the way you respond to the environment you're put in. Ну, наверное, я не знаю, приемник голова. Shoot, I never knew that they sat, что они сидели там, где написано Radiohead. Логично как-то, я не могу объяснить, почему это по-английски, но как-то это Radiohead, like head office radio, I don't... It's gonna be like broadcasting term. This right here really reminded me of early Bon Iver and Fleet Foxes, like the way the music swells behind everything. I honestly didn't even check if this artist has... It looks like there are a few albums out there. I do remember seeing this single artwork earlier too. Anyway, this is one of those releases that I loved. Fleet Foxes. I loved early Bon Iver. You know, Bon Iver is still one of those artists, but like his first two albums are still just like absolute greats. And Laura Marling and Cat Power and other female singer-songwriters like them, I don't know, that has a special place in my heart, because that's one of those, I don't know why it goes back to like 15 years ago or whatever, and just trying to dig in and consume as much of the burgeoning online music discourse. But I do feel like, especially with Fleet Foxes and Bon Iver, that there are a lot of people my age from the States who were into indie music that also have special musical memories of those groups. So listening to this and hearing a lot of those elements, but done not in a necessarily repetitive or derivative way, but in its own interpretation, was really great. So that is the EP Mечта from the artist Istoma. All right, now switching things up just a little bit. We have, it says single, but I'm calling it an EP because it's 13 minutes long. This is Triptych from the group, I love the group name, NUGGERS. Just like, that's fantastic. NUGGERS? It's a great name for... this is a weird one because the first track is a little bit different. It's still overall the same idea. This is like kind of electronic rock, kind of funky electronic rock, with just like a dominant saxophone and backing horns throughout the whole thing. It's a very simple idea, but it works really well. The first track has a lot more of this trip hop atmosphere. I'll jump ahead a little bit too. But it feels more like trip hop just because it's so slow, right? It's just a very, it's not speeding along anywhere, right? It's very methodical, and so when it does, when the saxophone does come in, it does feel just like, yo, damn, this is, I don't know, insert your trip hop artist of choice, Massive Attack or Portishead or I don't know, like whatever, plus saxophone, or like, it's a really brassy sound for the saxophone too. I mean, there are backing horns, so. And I honestly thought that that was going to be the general formula. Like, okay, we got like kind of this sort of like very chill trip hoppy thing, but then also this jazzy, you know, really heady type of thing. I mean, the horn stuff stays consistent throughout, but by the time you get into the second and then the third track for sure, we switch into more of a, like I said, an electronic rock, like, right, a little funkier, a little bit less of a relaxed atmosphere, and I mean, here we have a little bit more brooding going on. The drums are a lot more active. But the saxophone and the horns are always coming in. It's typically after about like a minute or so too, which is kind of nice. I actually like that. It gives the backing instruments and you know, the percussion, rhythm, all that, a chance to really kind of set the scene and have a little time for themselves before the saxophone and the horns come in and take your attention. But I actually like this. This is like, it's a very simple concept musically, but it's also not one that I can say I've necessarily encountered before. Right? Like, you can have instrumental groups with saxophone and horns and stuff too, but again, this sort of weird, just like off the wall, almost, jazz improv thing going on too. I don't know, maybe it is improv. I actually have no idea. So, it's a very interesting EP, and I think it's their first release, if I'm not mistaken. I am mistaken. Holy shit, okay. Never mind, they have an album already. Anyway, I mean, I guess they do have past releases, so that's maybe something to go check out. I'm probably going to go check it out a little bit later and see if it holds up to this, but at the very least, these 3 songs, really tight, really fun, kind of interesting, just something quite different, but also very familiar in terms of just overall sound and ideas. But again, it's those combinations that switch things up. So I hope we get more for them in the relatively near future. Maybe next year, who knows. But that is the EP Triptych from the group NUGGERS. Now, Shu asked, I have more English language watchers, and don't I think it would be more interesting to talk about sort of English language music instead of Russian? And I mean, the thing is, there are like 300 million English music channels under the sun, and they do all largely focus on what is being released abroad. And the thing that's difficult too is, and like, I hate to say it, but it's kind of a fact, there are way more releases in the English language end of things, just in the States alone, without even considering like, the UK and other. And with each passing year, it feels as though the Western musical discourse expands, because obviously there's Latin music. There are artists from other countries that are breaking into UK and American markets, and so then that further expands the discourse. Whereas the Russian market is pretty self-contained. It is largely consumed within Russia and then a few of the neighboring regions. But the reason I choose to talk about this is because, again, it's Russia related. That's kind of my whole thing, right? But on top of that, there's nobody else talking about Russian music. This is not really, I mean, like, I just do a stream once a week just because I kind of like talking about music, and I do think it's interesting to potentially throw out some of these groups that you would realistically never otherwise hear of. And it's also worth mentioning that on the TikTok end of things, which I don't use, but I have enough of a finger on the sort of online pulse to understand that Russian music oftentimes does sort of pierce the wall of the sort of Western attention. I don't know how to phrase that, but basically it breaks through to a Western audience when certain things are trending, and if maybe they originate in Russia, or maybe they, for whatever reason, originate in a different country, but Russian music gets used. Regardless, there are Russian artists that are gaining popularity because of TikTok. The Gorilla Glue, the rappers from like April, I want to say, that had like the Russian Trap House release. They actually got quite a bit of play on TikTok, and like in short video content and things of that nature. So I don't know. I mean, music is music, right? Even if you don't understand what is being sung, it doesn't really matter because the music is more or less universal, right? That's just like that's the great thing about music. And I don't know how many times, probably an uncountable number of times, Russians have loved songs in a foreign language, whether it be English or French or Italian, and they have no idea what is being sung. But it doesn't really matter because you can get the idea of what's going on from the overall tone. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. So yeah, mainly it's connected to Russia. I'm just doing it because I've made a conscious decision a few years back to focus on Russian music, like myself, just listen to what's going on here because I'm here, right? And then to share a little bit of that with people who might be interested in it abroad. And actually, honestly, something which I wasn't anticipating either, my viewership does still tend to skew foreign, obviously, like outside of Russia. But the Russian percentage, like, I'm this channel's not growing by leaps and bounds, but the overall views are starting to balance out a little bit. I'm starting to get more Russian viewers when videos go up and when streams go up. So I don't know. The other thing I will say too is, and I know it's kind of dumb, but I do occasionally, not every week, but maybe every other week or every third week, get messages from one of the artists that I mentioned, and I always think that's kind of nice. It's, for them, it's nice to sometimes get recognition or have somebody paying attention to what they're doing. So, and I don't know, it's kind of compliment somebody on what they're doing, and if that helps them out a little bit, that's great too. So, all right, moving on to, we're already halfway through, so I told you it's gonna be a short one today, but we're on to the mini album here, right? 21 minutes long. This is послезавтра by, or the day after tomorrow in English, by the artist Меня зовут Masha. My name is Masha. We've got a female singer-songwriter here. She left Russia at the start of the war. She relocated to Georgia originally and has since relocated to Paris. And musically, it's just kind of like, it's upbeat songs, but there is throughout the whole release a sense of melancholy, which kind of makes sense. A lot of the songs are about being far from home or missing things. But at the same time, that upbeat music does give the tracks an overall sense of hope, right? And maybe not necessarily with the day, but at life as a whole, so.
Сверху видно город. Помнишь, как-то дома мы смеялись, что уедем, и теперь мы здесь.
Да, я отвечаю там чуть попозже, хорошо? Я все как-то понимаю и все, но я не совсем согласен. Так что, чуть попозже. Okay. So we had the female singer-songwriter thing. I like the chorus here. There's no, I can't remember who it reminds me of, but we had the female singer-songwriter thing earlier with Istoma, and obviously with меня зовут Masha, we're getting that again as well. But it's a different type, right? The Istomo is more of that really sparse acoustic. This has a little bit more of that pop radio sensibilities, right?
Целый год и целый день песен вместо сказок. Лучше знать бы сразу, где вранье, где правда, где любовь, где надо, где живет мой смех. Знать бы раньше всех. Но я потерялась в большом поле. Ты только не говори маме, тем, кто был рядом, передо мной. Но мне едва ли сердце поведи, не давай другим играться. Раньше звала с собой, но теперь беги обратно.
Again, I do feel like pop radio is a good way of describing this, but I don't think that's necessarily a derogative term. And it's not all like that. Obviously, like I would say about half the songs fall into that pop radio category, and then the other half are, I don't know what the alternative of that is, but I think you get what I'm saying. Maybe, hopefully. So, a nice short release. Quite a bit different than Istoma, but also kind of in that same branch of the musical tree, which I'm probably being oversimplifying it with just like female singer-songwriter, but still, overall, in terms of like pop leaning, I think it's a very nice release. And again, in terms of also what we have heard in 2026, there have been a few others, but not a ton. So this is also just like a nice, I guess, addition into the grand scheme of releases for the year. So that is the mini album here, послезавтра, from меня зовут, Masha. Now, moving on, we get to the electronic release. This is до vesny. The artist is Monowoman, and album artwork is very abstract, which I guess is fair. This is an album written about the coming of warmer weather and the reawakening of nature. It was composed with a groove box, which is one of those little boxes that you use in electronic music for like looping things. You like get the loops all going, and anyway, I had to do a little research into it. So groove box, it's this thing. Basic idea, this was not recorded on a PC. This was put together like actually, which I feel like with electronic music in 2026 is an important thing. And I think that artists do like to make note of that, is that they aren't composing this on a PC where it's all of the tracks. Like when they're actually using physical devices that they have to have some level of mastery of, I do think that's important to highlight, just because, yeah, it's a little bit more difficult, but it also has more of an actual instrument feel, if that makes sense. But also in this release, there are field recordings of Karelian forests are used, but I honestly could not tell what those would be. I mean, like there are moments I'm just like, yeah, that maybe is a tweaked sound from the forest, but I don't know. I'm taking the artist's word at it. Honestly, this is the type of IDM music that I love, where it's not really rhythms or melodies in a traditional sense, but it's musical in the way that like the ambient noise of a city can be, right? Like the sounds of a bunch of footsteps in a moving crowd, and then the voices of them alongside the hum and the whooshing of traffic. Like there is something rhythmic and musical to just the movement of life, and I feel like IDM does that in a very artificial way. But anyway, let me go ahead and throw this up here. Wait, do we have a video? Oh, wait, I guess you can, yeah, there's the groove box. You can see twisting the knobs. I will be right back. 1 second. I'm gonna hit the other track. Slushy Roads was the one that I was kind of big on. But I do think Gallo and Slushy Roads are probably the two that do the best job of highlighting that. I don't know, how did I have it in my notes here? The not really rhythms or melodies, but just like the musical aspect to the ambient sound and rhythm of life. So I'll cut it off there. You heard enough of Gallo and you've heard enough of Slushy Roads to get the idea. But yeah, I don't know. Again, when it comes to electronic music, IDM, I think of all of them is probably my top pick. So and even obviously within IDM there are various subdivisions of that subgenre. But I do like this. It's not quite twitchy, it's not quite glitchy, but it just feels kind of chaotic, but chaotic in the way where everything comes together still somehow and creates something that even though you can't necessarily hum the rhythm or the melody, you can feel it. So that is the album Do vesny from the artist Monowoman. So, yes. Okay. All right. We're to the one metal release. This is the mini album this is the album Dnevnik, lичных tragedий, or the Diary of Personal Tragedies by the group Pale Hands. This is one of those albums where the opener threw me off. It's one of those where I'm not sure. I'm still not entirely sure. It kind of feels like it maybe would be better, like as an ender of sorts, but that's up for debate. But yeah, this is a screamo album technically, and I don't like screamo, so that right there should maybe give you an idea as to the quality of this on the whole, if I'm talking about it. This is a group from St. Petersburg. Their only other release was 8 years ago. It was their self-titled. In the intervening 8 years, since 2018, when they put that out, a lot of stuff has gone down for them. Most of it necessarily not the greatest, and this album is them... oh, God. What's the mental and emotional scars left on the members are being catheterized on this release. The vocals are what you would expect of screamo, so there's really no surprise there. But the instruments are just so tight on this that it kind of negates the vocals. And actually the vocals are like not the worst in the screamo genre. I'll just put that up there. It's also interesting too, because when I was reading about this group, it turns out they have, even though this is only their second release, they've kind of helped launch a bunch of other smaller metal artists. I know a few weeks ago, or I think last month, I talked about Maxim Yevsikov. He had I cannot remember the name of the EP right now, but it was the one that was like based on Dungeons and Dragons and old SNES RPGs. Anyway, Yeah, he originally was like in this group as well too. But I'll just play a little bit of it, give you a taste. So just brace yourselves, I guess. Again, screamo is just one of those subgenres. It's just, I don't know why you would choose to do that. Like, there's all sorts of other ways you do it, but the band part of this is able to. It's enough for me to overlook the screamo aspect of it, so. And I will throw on the opener track here in just a second so you can understand why I was a little caught off guard by it. It's not like anything crazy, but... So, Shu, what I would argue is that this is not Slayer or Pantera or Sepultura. And you're right, I can go listen to those groups if I want. But two things. First of all, I don't rewatch the same film every time I want to watch a film. I don't read the same books or even the same authors. I'm one of those people who's always trying to consume new media, whatever that happens to be. In the same way that if I go to an art museum, I don't want to go look at the exact same paintings I've seen before. Sometimes it's nice to go back, right? I do listen to Pantera and Slayer and stuff like that. I listen to those groups when I go cycling. Like, those are... Here. I was thrown for a loop with... Like, I shouldn't have been, but, like, I just was not kind of expecting this from the opener track of this release. Shu, if anything, you should have made the comparison to Converge, right? Like, that would have been a bit more fair of a comparison. And then you could be like, yeah, this is a second-rate Converge. It's not Evanescence. Oh, yeah, the vocalist in the background. Yeah, it does have that sort of like that pop goth sort of thing going on. But I'll get to Shu in just a second here. Yeah, again, I'm not a huge fan of screamo, but I think on the whole, yeah, I was able to just kind of put it aside and actually just enjoy it. And I think Converge is a good one. And I'll come back to Converge, but actually I'll just talk about Converge right now. When Converge, I remember people loving Converge in the States, and I remember going to a Converge show in Iowa City at was it Harry Mary's, or I don't know, Harry Mary's was in Des Moines, but I don't remember the name of the venue in Iowa City. It's on the second floor above that bar. It doesn't matter. I saw a lot of underground metal shows there. And I remember going to the Converge show and just like almost getting punched in the face by like a bunch of hardcore kids. Not because of fighting, but because they were just hardcore dancing. And it was just like super aggressive. And I just hated. I hated Converge. I know everybody loves Jane Doe and all of that stuff. I still don't like old Converge very much. Now, when Converge switched up their sound and when they started to change it around, what would that have been, like 2014, then I started to get into Converge. And I think, anyway, so I'm going to come back to that change in Converge's sound in just a second, but I think this does have some of that old Converge energy. It's that sort of really chaotic, hardcore type of sound. Granted, yeah, there is the screamo thing going on here, but again, musically, it's just so tight that, yeah, it's solid. It's solid all the way around. So this is the mini album here, Dnevnik, lичных трагедий, and the group is Pale Hands. Now, I will address skew, right? When it's why am I listening to this with? I could go listen to Sepultura or Slayer or Pantera or whatever. And like I said, I do listen to those groups. I do, but everybody has their own consumption patterns when it comes to media, right? Some people do watch the same shows and the same films over and over again, either it be as part of a yearly ritual. I know obviously there are people who watch, and I think sometimes it's with yearly rituals, if it's, like people watch Home Alone every year at Christmas, that's fine. Even people watch Harry Potter every year at Christmas. Again, that's fine. But there are also people who once a year will rewatch a film series, or sometimes they'll even rewatch a whole television series. I know I have a friend who was telling me that when he goes to his family's cabin, doesn't go very often, but every single time he's been up there as an adult, they only have a DVD player, and he rewatches Breaking Bad every single time. Like, that's fine. Like, if that's what you're going to do, if that kind of is tradition, that's that. I don't typically do that. I probably should more, especially when it comes to things like books or even films. But with music, for me, music is one of those things where the groups that you mentioned, Shu, the Sepulturas, the Slayers, the Panteras, the Slipknots, the Deftones, like all of those groups I grew up on, right? Those are my musical basis. And on the one hand, yeah, like I can recognize that there are a lot of groups that aren't as good as that. Most groups in various genres aren't as good as that. But at the same time, also, Slayer did put out some pretty mid albums. Like, let's not pretend that every single thing Slayer put out was fantastic, in the same way that every single thing Deftones or Metallica or Slipknot or any group, they all have some pretty mid albums, right? Even Nine Inch Nails, my favorite groups. I like there are albums of theirs I'm just like, yeah, I'm not like really super interested in listening to that. At the same time, for me, when I was getting into those groups, when I was discovering Pantera or Slayer or Slipknot or Nine Inch Nails or any group, whatever it happened to be, obviously metal was the thing, but even when I got into indie or electronic music, it was always then one of those things where once you discovered an artist, you discovered the artists that inspired that artist, right? And so I remember being in high school and then in university and then out of university and listening to new music, but also like going back and listening to the music that those musicians had listened to. And I'm at a point right now where, first of all, I've consumed decades worth of music just in my own lifespan and also music from the period of time before I existed. And I have enough background kind of musical knowledge that when I listen to stuff too, especially in 2026, I can hear those young whippersnappers, those kids today, right? I can hear them when I hear groups. Byte 59 is a good example of this. And Byte 59 was a group that I talked about probably a month ago out of Moscow. And it's like, you listen to them, you're just like, these guys, I don't know if it was like their older brothers that exposed it to them, because they're not super old. They're like 20 something. It's totally possible when they were young kids, their parents were playing. But it's just like these guys grew up around nu metal. Like nu metal is something that they just were fed, like that they took in with their mother's milk type of situation. And to me, it's interesting to hear, like, yeah, these are copies of a group that previously existed, but all of art is a copy of a copy of a copy. But copy is not even the right term. They're all reinterpretations. And sometimes reinterpretations are derivative. And when reinterpretations are derivative, it's usually not a good thing. It can be done in such a way that the music pays tribute and is actually very, very close. I cannot think of the group now. There was a group a few years back that a lot of people were praising because of how close they sounded to like the old Led Zeppelin. I cannot, for the life of me, it was like Three Brothers or something like that. And I cannot remember their name right now. And I think they've just kind of disappeared since then. It was a shtick. They had like a very specific sound and it kind of worked. But I think repeating sounds from the past isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think we look at that and we reinterpret it. And sometimes it is. It's very, very close. But it's always going to be slightly different. I know my favorite album from last year, Oven from Zlo, was them basically just being like, what if we tried to make Iowa by Slipknot in 2025? And you hear that all the way through the album. But at the same time, it's its own thing. And like, it's so, like, I don't know. It's one of those things where I hear Iowa, I hear Slipknot in that album, but I also recognize they are doing their own thing. Like, this is its own sound. It's not a copy. They're not trying to mimic it 100%. They listened to that album until the CD was like scratched and unrecognizable. They imprinted it into their musical DNA, and now it's been sort of re-expressed. In terms of, is it possible to create anything new? That's, I think, where electronic music comes in. And electronic music, I highlighted here at the third release was glitchcore. And, you know, glitchcore is kind of new. It's a new interpretation. And in terms of the actual combinations of notes and rhythms and how we can actually arrange sound, then yeah, nothing is going to be new ever again, just because there are a fixed number of permutations, there are a fixed number of wavelengths that sound exists in. We're just physically limited to, you know, the electromagnetic wave spectrum and well, not that necessarily, but like the speed of sound and wavelengths and stuff like that. And also just like how we can arrange those things. So in the same way that you could argue that all books and all films have already been made, it's the same argument as everything has already been written, right? Or Shakespeare wrote every single play. I'm sorry, man. I'm trying. I feel like I'll try to reiterate this at the end. I'll come back to this at the end. I think I've said this, the piece in in English now for the most part. I'll come back to it. I'll try to encapsulate it in short in Russian at the end, because I think it's a great topic. It's a great conversation. It's very philosophical. It's very interesting. I think art is one of those wonderful things. It's really fun to analyze. It's really fun to discuss. Everyone has opinions. It's like, but it's universal. It doesn't matter if it's Russian music or English music or South African music or whatever the hell. It's like, it's all that. But let me get through these last two albums, and we'll come back to the philosophical end of things. But moving on. This is all right. We gotta talk about Dead Blonde here. This is ДЕЛО Мертвой блондинки. Now, Dead Blonde is actually an artist who I discovered 2 years ago. I cannot remember. Oh, what was the album 2 years ago? The one, Perestroika. Yeah, that was the one. That was 2 years ago. Jesus. Dead Blonde is an artist where there is a lot to be said about her image and her sound, but it's actually surprisingly deeper than I think most people would guess from like first glance or first listen. This is her 5th release, this mini album here. And Dead Blonde does keep the retro sound for the most part. But if in the past her lyrics were from the point of view of just like kind of observer to all of the criminal activities going around, Dead Blonde's whole shtick is this sort of late 90s, early 2000s, like the dangerous criminal aspect of Russia at that point in time, but also the super like all of the new rich and the wealth and everything that came with it. On this album, instead of her just being an observer to all of the crimes that are going on, in each of these tracks, which each one is telling us, right, crime, casino, naked, on the rocks, this is a narcotic, to be a perfect wife, powdered sugar, right? They're all allusions to various illegal activities for the most part, whether that be murder, gambling, narcotics, things of that nature. In all of these tracks, Dead Blonde is now an active participant. She's still a participant who nobody would suspect of being the one committing the crimes, but she's the one committing the crimes here. I saw one person describe this album as not an of her character, I should say, on this album, as, quote, not an amoral monster, but instead an artifact of that reality where the criminal 1990s and the aesthetics of Tumblr bloggers get thrown into a cement mixer. And that's really it, right? It's the 90s, that the aesthetics of the 90s and kind of the online internet era, not necessarily of 2026, but of like 2020, maybe a little bit before COVID. And I do think that on the whole, musically, it sounds a lot like what I think perhaps a lot of, especially older Westerners, think of when I think of Russia, that like late 1980s, like very end of the Soviet Union into the first decade or so of Russia's modern existence. So there's also some level of nostalgia on this release, whether it was nostalgia for a time that somebody actually lived through or one that they have lived vicariously through they have lived vicariously through Hollywood films. Let me we're going to start with it's gaudy, it's schlocky, but like that's also kind of the point. And it's the type of music that I feel like in Russia particularly could easily annoy some people, because it's just like, again, it's a gimmick. but there's also a level of understanding of the source material. It's kind of hokey, I know, but like again, that is the point. Да, 100%. Блин, это вообще... Я первый раз был здесь в 6-м году. Я вот это 90, я все полностью пропустил. Но я не знаю, может быть, я уже здесь столько, что на какой-то уровне почувствую вот это 90-е. Или, может быть, там уже даже в 6-м году, может быть, вот этот звук еще здесь был. Но я это чувствую тоже, что, блин, это просто 90 здесь. And I kind of loved it. It's like, this is one of those albums too where, like, this, like, when I first heard this, I was just like, oh, fuck, it's Radio Dacha, right? Radio Dacha! I was just like, no, God, no. But, like, it's not cringe. It's on purpose. I don't know. And also, like, the album artwork is so over the top, but... This is... So, if you don't know what Russian music sounded like in the 1990s into the early 2000s, listen to this album. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough that you'll get the very good idea of it. And if you understand Russian, тогда каждая песня — это такая история достаточно, ну как, серьезная, но тоже как-то смешная немножко. Очень стереотипичная. Ну, как-то так. So, yeah, very retro, but in like a fun way. Anyway, yeah, if you're looking for something kind of fun, kind of, not cliche, but kind of hokey, kind of, you know, but it's intentional. It's supposed to be cringy. It's supposed to sound dumb and old because it's focused on that time period. And that's Dead Blonde's whole aesthetic, really. So, and honestly, if you like this album, then her last album, this is her sound. It's been evolving over the last few albums, but it's still generally like that. So this is the album ДЕЛО «МёРТВОЙ блондинки» from the artist Dead Blonde. And I think in some ways, for some people, that's probably... oh, that does sound like the placebo synthesizer. Holy shit. Yeah, that is. Yeah, I'll have to go back and dig into some placebo and try to match that up a little bit from the 1990s. But Dead Blonde, I think for some people probably would be like at the top of these two. But if possible, I like to finish with a full length album, and even though it's on the shorter side, this is Тихожитье, and the album is Середина, mira, or middle of the world. This is dark wave, that indie tronica, the indie electronic music, but it mixes up that sound over the 9 tracks. There's even a I don't remember which one, Krasny Maki, which has like straight up folk rhythms and stuff on it. Musically, it's quite serious, kind of gloomy, maybe even a bit depressing at times, but the songs are all generally focused on like life and more positive things. The thing with this album is last week I talked about Chernoburkov, and I mentioned how she had a sound on her Laviet Slov 2 was the album. That on that album, it reminded me a lot of like Fever Ray, The Knife, not Purity Ring so much, like Churches, Bat for Lashes, and that specific era of Pitchfork indie electronic music. And Chernoburkov, now here with Тихожитье, and there's another artist from a few months ago that also did this. That sound, I don't know if it's just a strange moment we're having here, or if that sound is coming back. But again, just like with Fleet Foxes and Bon Iver, I really, again, that's a sound that to me fits in that same era, maybe a little bit later. So hearing it now with a slightly more Russian take versus, again, groups like The Knife or Churches or Bat for Lashes is something that I like. I don't know. It sits well with me. Anyway, I'll get into it a little bit. Also, really, really good album artwork as well too. Very simple, but yeah, it catches your attention. I need to do better notes where like I actually do a better job of marking specifically which songs I need to highlight for what, but maybe I'm just a sucker for this like specific type of dark electro pop, indie pop, but jump ahead. Again, a little bit of some post-punk in there, a little bit of some synth wave, dark wave, if you will. There are musically, like, it's all within the same kind of genres which you would expect to kind of interact with each other. Again, synthwave or post-punk. But there's something here. It's kind of fun. It's dark, but it's also not like super dark. I don't know. Again, I could have ended with Dead Blonde. Maybe would have been a better choice, but I do, again, I give preference to longer albums. And this is, I don't know, I had fun with this. Simple. But a lot of music is, so. So I'll cut it off there. That is the album Середина мира, or like Middle of the World, by the group Тихожитье. And that is where we will cut it off. Shu asked, he said, I hope that in your streams, your Philippe Kirkorov is never going to appear. I will have you know, Shu, I listened to Kirkorov's newest album, just, not all of it, but like 4 or 5 songs, just to listen, just to see. Вы говорили, что музыка говна и это все. Вот это говно. 100%. Вообще просто говнище. It's just it's just horrible. Kirkorov is awful. But yeah, I do want to here at the end attempt to in Russian or whatever. I want to attempt briefly to try to restate, if I can remember it more or less, in Russian, what I was saying in English about music. So if you heard it already in English, just sit tight for a second. I'll try to do the short version of it. And that's basically, я понимаю, что это Sepultura, Slayer, Pantera, они все существуют. И я понимаю, что в любой момент я могу просто взять и послушать те старые пластинки, которые вот считаются классикой. Но, блин, вот там сразу забыл, что я сказал до этого. Короче, я не пересматриваю какие-то старые фильмы. Обычно я смотрю, и, может быть, там лет через 5-10 я пересматриваю, да? А в целом, если я хочу что-то смотреть, я смотрю что-то новое. Что-то, которое до этого я никогда не смотрел. Я всегда хочу испытывать какие-то новые эмоции. Да, иногда я не помню то, что я смотрел до этого, или читал до этого, или слушал до этого. Может быть, я помню, но не на 100%. Но я такой человек, я просто такой человек, который мне более интересно вот это, чтобы не то, что я поставлю, чтобы поставить галочку, что «Ой, я это посмотрел», «Ой, это я послушал». Я просто хочу найти какие-то вещи, которые вот там я не ожидаю. Да, есть, это бывает с книгами, хотя я сейчас особо не читаю, и это проблема, но что делать? Вот, может быть, там уже, я не знаю, я знал, но это другая история. Кино, да? Я не знал. Я знал, что там очень много плохих фильмов сейчас, что тоже такая же проблема, как с музыкой, когда все одно и то же, и как-то особо там нет ничего интересного. Но иногда ты найдешь что-то, это просто прям вау. Недавно мы посмотрели прослушку, да, The Wire, и я понимаю, что это, это сколько там, 20 лет назад они снимали. Все равно такой сериал можно просто пропустить, потому что это старье. Но посмотрели, а я это обожаю сейчас. Я собираюсь это пересмотреть? Нет, не скоро. Может быть, никогда. Но все-таки с сериалами как-то другая история немножко тоже, потому что я особо не смотрю то, что сейчас выходит. Мы такие любим смотреть то, что они уже снимали до конца, чтобы просто смотреть все с начала до конца. Ладно, с музыкой вернемся. Ну, туда. Короче, мне тоже очень нравится слушать то, что люди пишут сейчас. Да, очень часто это похоже на то, что было. Очень часто то, что они пишут, не так... Получается, не так интересно или так хорошо, как те классики. Но в целом тоже интересно смотреть то, что происходит. И я долгое время старался следить за то, что происходит в Америке, да, с музыкой. И это просто невозможно. Здесь это тоже, чтобы невозможно, но здесь, индустрия здесь крошечная просто. Смешная, крошечная, жалкая иногда вот там. Но все равно есть моменты. Я говорю, вот там «Зло» и их альбом «Овен». Они выпустили там 1 января 2025 года. Это для меня было открытие. Я до сих пор думаю об альбоме. Еще... fucking their name is just so difficult. It's like, fuck me. Ш. Fuck me. Hold up. 1 second here. I got. You know, it's on my Spotify. Just let me find the name of the album real fast. Короче, есть такие группы до сих пор, которые меня... Может быть, да, это не то, что было тогда. Но опять тоже, когда шумы штормовых широт. Шумы штормовых широт. I had all of the words, I just had them in the wrong order. Те группы, которые мы слушаем в молодости, естественно, они будут круче и важнее, и вот это все. Если я хочу это слушать, пожалуйста, у меня есть мой старый iPod. Да, у них очень классное название, классное имя, и, честно, музыка такая post-metal, примерно как Russian Circles. Я обожаю Russian Circles, а то, что я нашел здесь в Москве, группа, которая играет как Russian Circles, и, честно, вот на концертах, когда они играют, вот это, как я понимаю, главный чувак у них, барабанщик, и он просто как, он всегда там, он fucking gone, he's like ape shit. Короче, я это делаю, и сложно это все сказать, потому что это огромная тема. Не знаю. Я знаю, что очень много чего, что я слушаю, потом просто уходит как-то, и я забуду. Да, я это понимаю. Но так и было с музыкой из Америки. Не знаю. Наверное, достаточно. Честно, потом, если будет... можно в следующий раз вот продолжать. Вот это... Будет новая музыка в будущем, или вот это все, но это как-то... I don't want to sit here too long in Russian at the end. Mainly because... I don't know. It's rough. I could go on. I don't know. It's weird. I feel like half the time when I'm talking about stuff with my wife, I feel like I'm losing my mind and I'm just losing my ability to speak Russian. And then just talking about some random bullshit on a stream, I can do halfway decently. So I don't know. Whatever. Long story short, I've got thoughts about music, but I think on the whole, to kick back to English, the classics are always going to be the classics, and they are always going to be there for us, and we can always go back and listen to them, and I do. But I also want to find my own new classics, and living outside of the United States, all of the people I know in the States, and actually a lot of the Russians I know who no longer live in Russia, their musical world is detached from mine. I could try to follow what's happening in the States, but I can't go to those concerts. I'm not part of those conversations in the same way. So I would rather dig here and try to find things here that I can turn around and show to people and be like, listen, you're never going to hear this anywhere else, but check this out. You might kind of love this. Because there is a lot of good stuff. It might not be the most original. It might not be sometimes as good in production or ideas as some of the stuff coming out of the States or Europe or whatever other country. But there is still something to be offered musically from Russia, even if it is music that is reinterpretations of what's been going on. That is music. That's what music has always been. We got rock and roll because a bunch of white dudes started listening to black people music, 100 years ago, and they mixed it up, and we got that. That's very, very simplifying it. I'm just going to cover my ass right there for a second. But music is always people listening to other people's stuff, being like, I like that. I'm going to do that, but a little bit different. That's just art in general. So, I don't know. Not probably breaking anyone's brain with this discussion, but I will wrap it up. It was musically kind of a short one. There were only 10 releases. They were all quite short, but definitely some fun ones in there. I thought the glitchcore stuff is quite interesting. It's a sound that I have heard before, but understanding it is its own sort of sub-genre with its own aesthetics is kind of cool. It's good to find that stuff out. Istoma with that sort of Fleet Foxes, Bon Iver, Cat Power energy. I love that. Dead Blonde, obviously. There's just like a lot of, again, are these albums that are going to stick around, that I'm going to be recalling 3 years down the line? Probably not, but Да, конечно, шучу. Спасибо, что пришли. Всегда рад видеть вас. So, and not just you. Everyone who tunes into the stream is always good. Even if you are quiet observers, I still thank you for tuning in and listening to me ramble in one way or another for an hour and a half. But as it is, I'm going to wrap it up. Everyone have a good evening, good afternoon, whatever time of the day it happens to be where you are. Take care of yourselves. And I will see you when I see you. But until then, пока-пока.